lot of buzz building up in the aviation sector over the last few weeks, with reports suggesting that Indian carriers are in talks with foreign players for a stake sale. This coming close to 3 months after the government allowed FDI in aviation, which many felt could be a potential game changer for this ailing sector. But will any major deals take off anytime soon? That's the big focus on We Mean Business today. Also later on the show, we take stock of what 2012 has meant for Indian aviation. Let me introduce our guests on the show. With me here in the Delhi studio, Kanu Gohain, former Director General of Civil Aviation. Also with us, Kapil Kaul, CEO of South Asia Kappa. We will be joined in by Ankur Bhatia, Executive Director of Bird Group shortly. Mr. Jitendra Bhargav, former ED of Air India, joins us from Mumbai. So does Sharan Lilani, aviation analyst with Angel Broking. Many thanks all of you for being with us. But before we start the aviation discussion, let's take a look at the big story of the day. Huge uproar after Walmart's disclosure statement in the United States revealed that it spent $25 million in the last 4 years on lobbying for various projects, which also includes entry into India. The BJP naturally is furious and says lobbying is illegal in India, and the Prime Minister must answer.
FDI मल्टी ब्रांड रिटेल पर बहुत बहस चली है, जिसमें यह भी आशंका व्यक्त की गई कि क्या कुछ लोगों ने लॉबिंग की, क्या कुछ पेमेंट हुए। यहाँ FDI की कुछ जो सहयोगी कंपनी है हिंदुस्तान में वॉलमार्ट, उनके पदाधिकारियों के खिलाफ कार्रवाई भी हुई, ये भी छपा है। बहस में विपक्ष के माननीय नेता अरुण जेटली जी ने भी यह आशंका पर विस्तार से इस सदन में चर्चा की थी। तो सरकार की ओर से कहा गया ऐसा कुछ नहीं है। आज हमारे लिए बहुत पीड़ा की बात है माननीय उपसभापति जी कि पूरे देश के सारे महत्वपूर्ण अखबारों में खबरें विस्तार से छपी हैं कि वॉलमार्ट ने अपनी लॉबिंग डिस्क्लोजर रिपोर्ट जो अमेरिकन सीनेट को दी है उसमें कहा है कि 125 करोड़ रुपया उन्होंने लॉबिंग के लिए खर्चा किया है, भारत के लिए खर्चा किया है।
The revelations that have today appeared in the media that Walmart itself has deposed before the United States Senate Committee, saying that it has spent a certain amount of money for lobbying, which is allowed in the USA, but which is illegal in India. And in that instance, in those circumstances, it said that a certain amount of money has been spent to acquire the right for foreign investment in the Indian retail trade sector, which the Walmart anticipates is a huge volume for profit making and transactions to the tune of about $500 billion.
This is not only regarding FDI in multi-brand retail. Walmart has officially submitted that it spent so much money in lobbying with the US Senate, US House of Representatives, US Trade Representatives and the US Department of State. Why it did so? It wants to enter the Indian retail market. The retail market is estimated to be worth about 500 billion currently and expect to cross 1 trillion mark by 2020. If Walmart has spent so much money in lobbying to get into the Indian market, something which we oppose tooth and nail in this house, I'd like to know whether Walmart has also spent money in lobbying with Indian lawmakers. If so, how much and what are the details?
Alright, so that was clearly the big story of the day, but let me now shift focus to the big discussion of the day, the Indian aviation space, and are we going to see any major deals taking off? There has been a lot of buzz that has been building up. Let me go across to our correspondent Arijit Banerjee, who also joins us as a guest on the show. Arijit, take us through some of those recent talks that have been happening, potential stake sale for Jet Airways as well as SpiceJet.
Yes, Shweta, if you look at it, of course, there was this huge buzz about Jet looking at Etihad for a stake, for Etihad buying a stake in Jet Airways. Apart from that, as you said correctly, there were reports of SpiceJet speaking to the Malaysian low-cost airline AirAsia. If you look at it, Shweta, at this time, with this window of opportunity opening up for Indian aviation companies, they are definitely looking for buyers. So it's not as if the foreign airline companies are looking to buy into Indian companies. It's the reverse way around this time. Indian companies looking at interested parties, whether it is earlier, even though aviation was if FDI in aviation was allowed earlier, it was only companies which were not in the aviation business. Now with the change in rules, foreign airlines can buy stake in Indian aviation companies, and that's why these companies are going in. Jet, of course, is reported to be looking to sell at least 24% stake, which could be for about $400 million, and SpiceJet could be looking at a similar amount. Jet Airways, of course, has to restructure the holdings it has, because most of its holding is through an Isle of Man company, so that needs to be changed. Those structures need to be changed to be brought about. But the big question is whether foreign airline companies will be interested, and that will depend on 2 or 3 factors. One, government regulation in terms of the costs which are imposed on an airline. 40% of operating cost is ATF. ATF is taxed separately in separate states. The tax rates are very high. The second is the airport charges, which most of these airports are now taking from airlines. They have recently been hiked, which means that the cost structure has become even steeper. Apart from that, the other big issue, of course, is going to be intensive competition. Is there going to be consolidation in the sector? Kingfisher is almost non-operational, so is it going to fold up? That, I think, will be a very crucial factor, because most of the foreign companies are looking at further consolidation in the sector, so that the number of players reduce, and the intense competition which is happening, where many airlines actually have very low yields because they are forced to sell seats at lower than their cost, that reduces. So that is going to be a crucial factor for foreign airline companies to come into the Indian aviation scene.
All right, let's try and discuss each of those factors that Arijit has flagged off in just a bit, but let me try and get a sense from Kapil as to whether we're going to, how soon are we going to see any of these major deals taking off?
Well, our assessment is that minus Indigo and the fact that Air India has already got the approval from the government to raise money, I think about $1.3 to $1.4 billion of capital raise would happen over the next few months.
Okay.
And there's largely would be strategic investors coming in. It could be financial investors, and I could see possibly an IPO. I'm excluding Indigo out of it.
Okay.
So I think between all instruments available, roughly about 1.3 to 1.4 billion of capital raise.
Those are huge numbers, yes, we're talking about.
And you could, as I said, you could have strategic investors coming in. You could see financial investors. You could see a combination of both, and you could have a reportedly one LCC looking at an IPO. So everything on the table. The question is about valuation. Question is about timing. But I definitely see in the next few months. It could be before the end of this fiscal. Some could be in the early part of the next fiscal, but I definitely see a couple of deals happening.
Specifically to talk about Jet Etihad, because that has been creating a lot of buzz. The stock has zoomed clearly in the last 1 month ahead of possibility of that deal taking off. How close do you think Jet is to signing that deal?
Well, first of all, I think Etihad has been interested even before the FDI actually was approved. So they have been in the market. It's a part of their strategic blueprint for the next 10 years they're building, which involves building powerful alliances and ensuring that they take minority equity stakes in companies which are of strategic interest. So in pursuit of that, India is a critical market for them. It's almost like an extension of a home market, a very big market.
Right.
So from a strategic perspective, it's one of the key markets for Etihad. So one, I would think that there would be a very structured, deep-rooted alliance, which is what...
Immediately, but a marketing alliance is what you're talking about.
Initially, it would be an alliance. Based on that, subsequently, it could be equity investments. But I'm not very sure about the valuations part, though.
Okay, valuation, let's try and understand that. And Mr. Chairendra Bhargav, my question to you really is something that Arijit had flagged off, that it's clearly not just a valuations game. Are foreign players right now in a wait and watch mode? Do they want to see the Indian government's commitment to this sector? Do they want to see certain policies that are more conducive? Because many actually say that just allowing FDI in aviation isn't good enough. They obviously need to ensure that the sector does not result in destructive competition, if I could quote Mr. Ratan Tata here.
Shweta, I think the unpredictability of the government is too well known, so I don't think that will hold up any of the foreign carriers from investing in India. As far as the Indian market environment is concerned, we all know it's cost prohibitive. Airlines aren't doing well because the ATF prices are very high. The India's growth story that we had, that India was registering 18% growth, is no longer valid. 2012 is shown in a negative mode, the domestic market.
and so is the international market not doing very well. Now, why would a foreign carrier put in money in an Indian carrier is the question. Yes, Kingfisher, Vijay Mallya had mooted the idea of FDI by airlines in Indian carriers when Kingfisher was facing a deep financial crunch. The decision came in too late. By that time, Kingfisher had been choked, and the other players are probably going to reap the benefit. The question that comes in is, why should a foreign carrier invest in India? There would be two things that any international airline will look at an Indian carrier. What is the value addition that an Indian carrier do to them? What financial advantage can it bring to them? The sad part is that the value that an Indian carrier could have given to a foreign carrier and therefore become an attractive proposition has been eroded by the government of India itself. Allowing in foreign carriers to touch many points in India, so they don't need an Indian carrier to bring in traffic to the main gateways of India and provide traffic for Europe, United States flights, etc. So that's one erosion. Second is, the balance sheet of the Indian carriers is not rosy at all. Now, which means you're going to be putting money to basically bail them out rather than take them on a northward trajectory that they expand and expand fast and hold still stronger. Now, if you look at it totally, well, 3 months since the government announced the policy, we have only been hearing about it. I'm not saying that these kind of deals can be struck in a matter of weeks. It does take time. People are going to do due diligence, etc. But the reality is something more needs to be done by the government of India to make the Indian aviation sector vibrant, make it lucrative, and only if you can do that will foreign carriers be interested.
All right, you mentioned valuation, and I'd like to take that point forward. Mr. Kanu Gohen, I'd like to understand if right now Indian carriers are attractive bets for foreign carriers or not, because on one hand, yes, there's been value erosion, but also the fact that we're seeing valuations getting more and more attractive is one of the reasons why we may see foreign carriers even being interested.
You see, what Mr. Bhargava has stated is correct in the sense that if the Indian carriers do not have a value add item into a foreign carrier, then why should a foreign carrier invest into India? But nevertheless, the policy of the government to allow foreign direct investment into the airlines from an airline, foreign airline, is in the right step, because the foreign airline will understand how the airline business runs. Now, the foreign airlines who are coming into India, as Mr. Bhargava has stated, have got many points of landing in India. That is not an issue where the foreign airlines will not have an alliance with the Indian carriers, because they know that the Indian market is still available for them to tap in spite of having many landing locations. These foreign carriers understand that if they have an alliance with an Indian carrier, they can tap into the Indian market in a more big manner.
Okay, I'd also like to take forward another point that was raised by Mr. Bhargav, the fact that many actually believe that this was a policy which was made for Kingfisher. It was a policy which, in fact, even in the opposition criticism coming in for the government, was simply done so that Kingfisher could raise money. But as Mr. Bhargav was saying, it's ironical that it's the others who may end up reaping benefits of it. Ankur, do we see that really happening, the fact that Kingfisher may find no takers at all?
Well, as Mr. Bhargava said, I think that the issue is right now with Kingfisher and all the other Indian carriers is that there's a lot of debt in that, in those carriers.
Sure.
Now, for a foreign airline to come in or any other entity to come in to buy into debt, I think it's an expensive proposition. It is much easier to actually do a new startup and have fresh equity coming into that, because the fact still remains is that the growth has to come in. I mean, there's a decline which has happened now, but you can't have a country of 1.2 billion people or the middle class of say 300 million people and just having 30, 40 million air passengers. This is unrealistic. And the only way this can grow is when India grows towards the regional routes. And the regional routes will only happen once there is capacity deployment, and before capacity deployment there has to be infrastructure deployment in those airports, and specifically also in the metro airports as well. Today's day Bombay can't afford to have more regional planes coming in because they are up to their brink. Delhi is an airport which can do, but then the other regional airports in North India still have a gap between what is in terms of infrastructure which needs to be fulfilled. So that is where I would see foreign airlines coming in. And of course, I think it's just happened. The FDI announcement has just happened. It's too early to say. These things don't happen that you have an FDI announcement. I mean, there aren't people waiting in the wings. Of course, there are people waiting in the wings for sure. But I think it will get settled down.
So you're saying that we have to give it more time, and it will happen in due course.
It will happen. I mean, you will have international carriers flying into India with Indian partners in the future for sure. Because again, as I mentioned, we are just in a very small, we are just on the tip of the iceberg right now as air travel passengers are concerned.
Okay, you mentioned a fresh startup, a possibility of that, and I'd like Sharan to answer that question. What are we going to see really happen in the aviation space in the next few months? Consolidation is something that Arijit talked about as well. Are we going to see players like Kingfisher possibly folding up? Are we going to see the scenario also changing? FDI also making it attractive for new businesses to look at aviation as a possibility, a fresh startup? Is that looking likely? Or do you think that the current policy environment is a bit too unattractive? Mr. Ratan Tata has ruled out the Tata Group getting into it, for instance.
See, first of all, it's very difficult to get a license and permissions from the government to start a airline which everybody knows is a basically loss-making business when you start off. And secondly, the point about Kingfisher, it is very difficult for them to come back after having 7,000-8,000 crores of debt, plus infusing another couple of thousand crores just to start up a airline with the minimum capacity. So I don't think Kingfisher coming back anytime soon. And secondly, after Kingfisher's shutdown, I think these airlines have become more lucrative because I think they have come back to profit-making quarters. I think given the fact in 1Q they made profit, 2Q is seasonally very weak. But in the coming quarter, I think ticket prices are very high, load factors are improved. So I think they are going to make huge profits, not compared to last year, in the coming 2 quarters. So, and plus all the growth which is going to come in the next couple of years will be taken by these airlines rather than any new airline.
All right, in fact, I'd like Kapil to respond to what Mr. Ratan Tata has said about the aviation space, and let me actually try and read it out. He has said that it's completely a different sector today than it was at that time, and he's obviously talking about the mid-1990s when there was a proposal for a tie-up with Singapore International Airlines, saying that the Tata Group is unlikely to enter into the sector because of destructive competition. Going on to say that it's somewhat like telecom. It is proliferated by many operators, some of them in financial trouble. I would hesitate to go into the sector today in the sense that the chances are that you would have a great deal of competition which would be unhealthy competition, and saying that cutthroat competition which is done to keep you out is what he refers to as destructive competition. Is that an apt description of the Indian aviation space right now?
Nobody has a better experience than him. He wanted to start an airline in '96, but he was not allowed.
Right.
In 2003, he almost got down buying Air India, but that didn't happen. But it's a fact that I think the operating environment is very, very tough. And the fact it gets more tougher if the policy and regulatory environment is uncertain. So if you have a policy and regulatory environment uncertain, you have a physical environment which is extremely hostile, and on the top of it you have a competition which though has corrected this physical compared to last 4 or 5 years, you still have a very negative environment, and I think those are the entry barriers which large corporates would assess before coming in. So I think.
So you don't see a fresh startup anytime soon?
No, I definitely see a fresh startup. The question is
despite all that you're saying.
I'll say to you that when the FDI was announced, it was supposed to be, and according to me, one of the best decisions that this government has taken. I think it will be game changing.
Okay.
But it will be game changing if we actually allow other carriers to come in as well. New startups, well funded, good joint ventures coming in.
But why would anybody want to put money in this space is my question. You've just mentioned a long list of hurdles, entry barriers, making it absolutely uncompetitive. It's unhealthy, destructive competition as Mr. Tata calls it. Why would anybody want to enter this space?
Let me tell you, as of now, there are about 4 or 5 airlines which are planning to start.
Okay.
And those are not the airlines which we call well funded and strong, structured sort of airline entries. But there are 2 or 3 international LCCs which are evaluating the market, And if the government actually allows FDI, allows newer startups to happen, you would see 2 to 3 new airlines coming in the next 3 to 6 months.
And they are bullish on the Indian market,
yes,
despite all of this.
Because some of the corrections have already happened. If you look at it, that the structural challenges have basically from bottom up been sorted out with the Kingfisher downsizing, which has favorably impacted demand supply dynamics for the first time since 2004.
Okay.
And if the initiatives that the government is taking on correcting, for example, allowing ATF, sales tax and ATF to improve, or notification of ATF, some of the measures over a period of time, if not one can't put a timeline to it, would get corrected. But I think this is an opportunity at this point of time for stronger airlines to come in. Tatas might have a different view, but for example, airlines like AirAsia, airlines like Air Arabia, maybe Jetstar, I definitely see in the near term them coming if government is open to allowing new licenses to happen.
Okay, Mr. Gohain, in terms of policy changes, we often keep talking about it not being an environment that's really conducive to new players, conducive to existing players. I know the airlines have been lobbying for the longest time on the taxation issue, the fact that their fuel costs are very high and there are the taxes on ATF are exorbitant. But more realistically speaking, given the current fiscal environment, we don't really expect the government or the states to give up on taxation. What are the kind of policy changes that we can realistically expect in this sector?
See, it is known to all that the taxation on the aviation turbine fuel is the biggest hurdle, because 40% of an airline's balance sheet is on the fuel. Now the taxation in our country is not uniform. Some states have as high as 30%, whereas some states have got as low as 4%. So the first thing in this policy reforms, the country needs to have a uniform taxation policy. Having said so, as Ankur had stated, that for the growth of this aviation, it need not be airline centric. We have to see that the infrastructure is also coming up. The more airports, the more routes to the far corners of this country, for which there is still, as I mentioned earlier, scope for the airlines to reap into this rich market which India can provide. Coming to the issue of airlines coming in a joint venture with the existing airlines. Well, yes, the government has now given the FDI, foreign direct investment of airlines. Earlier it was not there when
right,
the FDI concept was born.
Right.
Now the airlines are permitted to enter into an alliance. They will have to make a study. Now we know in our country many of the airlines which have gone down or are going down is because of the bad management. There is no two way about it. So if a foreign airline comes into a joint venture with an Indian airline, maybe they will provide the technical know-how, improve upon their business.
That's a very valid point that's been made, Mr. Jitendra Bhargav. If you could comment on that, because very often you see Indian aviation companies actually turning around and blaming the government for the kind of state they find themselves in, the fact that they continue to bleed. But Mr. Gohain says it's simply poor management. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think Mr. Gohain is still wearing his government cap and does not want to put the blame at the doors of the government. The reality is, yes, policies haven't been brought in by the government in tune with the market requirements. They have not done it. To say that the managements of airlines are bad, well, you can say 10%, 20%, but you can't run them down that they're 100% bad. Indigo has shown that Indians are capable of running an airline. Where is the reason for putting the blame on the management? They are only reacting to the policies that the government has laid down. As we said earlier, let there be a comprehensive plan for the civil aviation. The plan still does not exist as far as the government of India is concerned or the airline sector is concerned. If you have a plan and you say, this is my roadmap for the next 5 years and these will be the policies that will be initiated, implemented to make airlines economically viable, the government is still not it. I don't wish to do it because Kapil is on the show. Kapil had organized a CAPA show in Mumbai only a few weeks ago, 6 to 8 weeks ago. Invited a lot of people from the aviation sector, invited people from the bureaucracy, also civil aviation ministry. I regret to say that not a single bureaucrat turned up for what would have been a very good exercise for them to know as to what are the airlines wanting for becoming economically viable? How should the government be reacting? What is to be done?
Okay.
Now, if this is the
it's an important point. The CAPA show, you're clearly one of the most well-respected organizations in the industry. And the point that Mr. Bhargav is making is very relevant. Does that give you a sense that the government's not interested?
Well, I don't think Indian aviation governments are interested in aviation. It's a very underthought.
It's totally abandoned as a sector.
It moves in a very ad hoc and informal manner. It is not. It doesn't move in a structured manner. It doesn't. It's not about with this government.
And does it pain the industry that it's just totally being ignored, neglected,
well,
and such a critical sector
for the economy? I can tell you for the last 20 years, if you look at from the time 1992, the airlines came up now, outstanding issues have remained. It's not with this dispensation. It's not with the previous dispensation. We continue to do good decisions in a one regime like 2004 to 2008. We did very, very constructive things. Even in this regime, if you see, the FDI itself is game changing, but it doesn't operate in a very comprehensive manner. What you need is a structure which is comprehensive and is transparent. And some of the outstanding issues that plague the industry is market access, for example. I mean, I don't know whether a foreign airline can get an entry. There is no stated bilateral policy. I don't know whether new airlines will be allowed. How it strategically impacts the current carriers. They might think that, okay, no airline is going to come. And suddenly overnight you might have 3-4 new airlines coming in. This inconsistency is ruining the sector. What it requires is consistent framework. And that means that you must have a framework which is competitive. And what has been talked about, the physical framework, yes, obviously that needs to be corrected. But you must have a structured framework. You cannot repeat again, it's not with this government. 22 years we had, the consistency is that we are not operating in a structured manner.
And that doesn't send out very good signals, Ankur. The fact that there is clearly no consistency in government policy, don't you think foreign carriers would also look at issues like these? Mr. Bhargav was of course telling us earlier that they expect the Indian policy environment to be like that, so that's not really an issue. Sure.
In 2004, we certainly opened up.
Yeah.
In 2008, we certainly closed. And if I take you from 1990s onwards, we liberalized in 90s. After 2 years, we stopped giving licenses. 96 airlines folded up till 2003, we didn't give a license. 5-6 airlines had approached during the time. Certainly in 2008, we opened up. 2004, we opened up bilaterals, which to me was very positive, allowed deregulation, was positive. But in 2008 to now, we're neither here nor there. So somebody has to explain that why do we open up? Somebody has to explain why do we close? Why can't this be consistency?
And is it knee-jerk reactions that on part of the government? For instance, Ankur, the fact that the government suddenly allowed FDI in aviation may have been seen as a larger part of a reform package that the government was unveiling. But many actually say this was the government's answer to the question it was constantly being asked, are you doing something wrong, which is why Kingfisher is folding up, you're not doing anything for this sector. And they said, you know what, this is what we have for you, take it or leave it, there's no more coming. Is that the sense you get?
Any foreign investment coming in, I don't think foreign airline who's large enough would only look at the aviation sector, that what is happening in the aviation sector in order to come and invest into India. They will look at the overall political situation, they'll look at the overall stability of the country, they'll look at the overall economy of the country, because it's not a small kind of money where they're investing. And I think that would be, I guess, a bit uncertain till the next general elections, because obviously, everybody knows that there will be next general elections coming in. So I think for this particular time frame, it'll be a tough one for an airline to take a call, because obviously everybody's seeing what has happened with the telecom industry, everybody's seeing what is happening with the other industries, and the overall picture in India, and in even global markets are not performing that. And again, having said that if a foreign airline has to come into India, it is very clear there is an opportunity for sure. There is no doubt about it. But there are opportunities available in other parts of the world as well. So
why
wouldn't they not want to go to any other place where they are a bit more certain of their return? So I think that is an important thing. But having said that, I would still say that the kind of growth which India can see in this particular sector in the next 4, 5, 10 years, because India has to go up to 200 million passengers flying domestically, and people aren't flying because there aren't flights to fly to things. Even today's date,
or it's too expensive in today's.
It's not a question of expensive. It's just overcapacity.
Flying has become.
It has become expensive. Flying has become expensive, and there are different sectors where, or the different fractions where you can actually see growth. Business class sectors is something which is very, very under supplied right now across the country. So you need to see more coming in there. But state capitals today are not connected by air. So if you were saying from one state to the other, or trading capitals are not connected by air. So these things need to be done. Can the existing carriers do it? Do they have that the capacities to do it? Do they have the right equipment to do it? I don't think that is that is something, because obviously they are focused upon metro to metro routes and they're doing a great job. And you can't have a mix of this business, because obviously once you start to do that, then is when you start to see problems.
All right, we're going to slip into a quick break at this point. On the other side of the break, we try and take stock of this year, 2012. What has it meant for Indian aviation and what's in store in 2013? That's coming up after a short break. Welcome back. You're watching We Mean Business. Kingfisher's financial troubles, Air India's mega strike, or the government finally permitting FDI in aviation. It's been quite a roller coaster year for this sector. Let me now try and understand what this year has really meant and what's in store next year. Let me go across to our correspondent Arijit Banerjee. Arijit, clearly two sectors that you cover, telecom and aviation, have made headlines all through the year. Take us through some of the highs and lows with regard to aviation in this year.
If you look at it, Shweta, there are a lot of similarities between the two sectors, and there are also some differences. First, if you talk about the similarities, these are both sectors which at one point of time were doing well. They are both in trouble. The companies which are in these sectors are facing a lot of problems, and most of these problems are because of government regulation which is not clear. There has been a lot of policy flip-flop on what should be, for example, in telecom, what should be the pricing of spectrum, how it should be allocated. Subsequent governments have changed subsequent policies midway. That has been the case with aviation as well. As Kapil just said, you open up in 2004, then 2008 you are closed, nothing much happening. So that way there has been the similarity between the two sectors. But if you look at it, telecom is in much better shape, because the telecom companies themselves are in much better shape. They are much larger in size now than the aviation companies, because there was a time when there was a lot of policy stability and the companies are profitable. Telecom companies in fact had at one point in time they were so profitable that companies like Bharti in fact have gone abroad and bought companies in Africa. So that way the telecom companies are in much better position. If you look at it, the government, the telecom ministry is also now making efforts to try and put things back on track. There is an empowered group of ministers which is looking at the telecom policy on a day-to-day basis. They are taking decisions, the auctions have been held. So there is an effort within the government to get telecom back on track. There is a realization within the government that telecom is very critical, very important, and telecom companies are in much better shape. But that's not the case with aviation companies. Aviation companies, just one decision, 49% foreign airlines being allowed to buy equity. But apart from that, if you look at it, the other structural issues are still not being sorted out in terms of aviation. So the aviation companies financially are also in a very bad shape. So there is the
government to wake up on that one.
Back aviation or get airline companies back into profitability is going to be a big is going to be a much tougher task.
All right.
Can you ask him that when were airlines profitable?
Okay. Why don't you answer that question?
He said that we have to get back airlines to profitability, but I just wanted to ask him, when was airlines profitable? We're about consistent about it then.
So you're saying it's not possible to make money?
Well, at least Indigo has continued to be profitable. So I think
I'm talking as an industry.
Yeah, Indigo has been profitable. Indian Airlines in fact was profitable. Yeah. We will discuss the Indigo case also in detail if we have the time, but let me move forward to at least try and get a sense of what this year has meant. And Mr. Jitendra Bhargav, I'd like you to quickly touch upon the mega Air India strike here that lasted close to 60 days. It was unprecedented in many ways, but would you classify that as a high in the sense and the way in the government, the manner in which the government handled that strike, was that really unprecedented?
Shweta, I think there are two aspects. One, how was the industry being visualized before the commencement of the year 2012? IATA had clearly projected that 2012 will be a bad year for two factors: the looming economic recession in the Eurozone and oil prices hitting the roof. It was hovering around $114, $115 to a barrel, but it did not turn out eventually to be as bad as it was projected. So the brighter aspect is that 2012 will not go down in history as a very bad year for the aviation sector. Indian sector,
worst in many years is what you're saying.
Sorry, come again?
We've seen worse years is what you're saying.
Yeah, because when you compare with certain years like the 2008, for example. Now, Indian market, yes, it can be described as one of the bad years for this. Negative growth, Kingfishers almost, one can say, being out of operation. And the third aspect, as you said, Air India. Now, there are certain bright aspects for Air India also. While strike is certainly a negative fact, there's no denying the fact, but government, after wavering for almost 3 years, eventually announced a 30,000 crore rupee lifeline for Air India. Now, that was the brighter side of it. Now, the question is, if the promises that have been made that Air India's performance will be monitored and money infused only if they attain certain milestones. If they can be made to do that and Air India can be put on a path of, I would say, revival, it would be a good year for this thing. Strikes, well, you have had plentiful of strikes almost on an annualized basis in Air India. We can forget about it. Air India is back in normal. Now, what we need to look at, prior to the break one was talking about, government policy. Now, you have a shortage of capacity in the market. All airlines are currently doing 80% load factor. Now, imagine if the economic reforms were to materialize, the market was to generate more business, more people were to fly, how well airlines cope with the increased demand. Enhanced fares is one way which will be beneficial to the airlines. But the role of the government comes in here. How am I to look at that? Yes, adequate capacity will be available to the traveling public 6 months, 12 months down the line. Now, there is no kind of agenda which can say that, look, this will be the capacity augmentation that will take place in 2013. This will be the market projection, and whether there is a shortfall and how is that proposed to be filled up by the government.
Space right now, it doesn't look like it's going to be a year where we're going to see significant improvement for the sector.
No, Shweta, I think we shouldn't be negative in our thinking. I'm at least an optimist. Say, for example, if the economic reforms being initiated by the government were to materialize, economy was to, say, register even a 7% GDP, 6.5% GDP, that growth will be reflected in the aviation sector. Now, my problem is there adequate capacity to really take advantage of the growth in the market? Now, that is something that government needs to deal with, and that is where I made a reference to CAPA, and you immediately switched off to Kapil for a response to it. Now, government has to be proactive. Government has to be proactive. Take a call now, not 6-8 months later. Mr. Ankur Bhatia is also right. When will the government take decision on the capacity? If there is capacity shortage, fare increases, government's reaction will be on predictable lines. Airlines are charging more, but they will overlook the factor that they did not initiate steps to create additional capacity so that there was competition in the market. Seats were chasing passengers and passengers not chasing seats.
Okay, I can see the Delhi panelists nodding in disagreement. Mr. Bhargav, I'll take their reaction very quickly before I go across to Sharon to get his view as well. Kapil, very quickly.
First of all, we are today charging, airlines are charging closer to costs.
Yeah.
And that's why there's a perception that the fares have gone up. This because of the fact that last year they were selling about $20 to $25 under recovery at a net level per passenger. This time, because the demand supply dynamics are in their favor,
right,
they are looking at having a fare regime which is closer to costs.
Right.
So in a sense that the airlines are just basically even covering costs. If you look at their Q2 results and even Q1 results, the listed Companies which showed profit had to do a sale and lease back to ensure profitability. Even Q3, as I was hearing, it will be profitable, but it's not on expected lines.
Right.
So the only difference between last year and this year is that last year they were selling 20-30% below cost. Because demand supply dynamics are in your favor, you are looking at closer to costs. And that's why the difference of 20-30%. So one that needs to be understood.
Okay.
Just coming to this question of what I treat this year as a very important year. I think it's extremely positive. One, that the corrections because of the industry structure has allowed the demand supply dynamics to be favorable.
So like you're saying, Kingfisher's financial troubles have actually worked in the favor of the rest of the industry, at least.
One that.
Right.
So the demand supply dynamics are first time in your favor. So airlines are doing closer to cost or cost plus, but closer to cost recovery. Pricing discipline has been amazing. You have had it, if you look at, there's hardly a 4-5% increase in pricing. So there is the capacity has been 4-5%. Your pricing discipline has been pretty good.
Okay.
Airlines are constantly cutting costs.
Okay.
So overall, because of the industry structure, some of these things are positively attributing to the sector.
Sure.
Other good decisions I would trade is FDI is a great decision.
Of course.
Decision in Air India is good.
Right.
And more important, I think the handling of strike was good.
Was
good as
absolutely
well,
something
yes.
that has
but
been
but
that
I
has
must
gone down as
Shweta tell you that this is the time that you need not look at issues that airlines have increased fares. I need to look at how they are charging fares. It's such a complex thing that nobody has been able to understand.
Sure.
We must make sure that we take this opportunity to structurally correct the industry. And I think this year, I think, gives you that possibility.
Sharon, your thoughts very quickly on 2012 and what's in store in 2013?
See, first thing, India lacks capacity, that is said, and the fact that Indian aviation is lucrative right now because the person who expands will take over growth, will take the advantage of this lower capacity. Since aviation companies currently have no money at all to expand, and leasing is a very expensive option for them, that's why everybody is out there looking for FDI, so they can get some kind of sales of do a equity dilution to a foreign company where they get technological know-how, good management concepts, and plus take advantage of the growing growth in India, and that can only happen once these FDI comes in. So I think even for a foreign airline, currently India is a very lucrative market, since they can also take advantage of this growth by putting in money in an Indian carrier and expand their fleet.
All right, Mr. Gohain.
My perception is not from the government side, as Mr. Bhargava has stated. 4 years is a long time. 4 years is a long time. I have left the government. Now, taking the cue from Bhargava's capacity and the other panelists, the capacity, well, one must understand that in the aviation sector, there are many private players. There are many studies, even CAPA has done the traffic projection, how the growth will be there. It is the private players who have to come into the market and invest and then bring the aeroplanes. Or the existing players, they can expand their capacity. As far as the government is concerned, not as the government spokesman, Bhargava, there is an acquisition committee in the government which you must be aware of. Whenever these private players like Indigo or for Jet Airways, they come to the government for expansion of their fleet, they are given permission to acquire more aeroplanes so that the capacity is there. The question is, which Ankur has also pointed out, are we, the great country of ours, connected from point to point, north to south, east to west? No. There is still a lot of areas which can be covered by air. 3, competition is necessary. Competition is necessary, that only will bring in a quality in the service. After all, an airline industry is a service industry. So the consumer needs a service of a quality type.
Here, sir, I'd like to just actually get all the panelists to respond to Indigo as a case study, really, in the Indian aviation space. When you mentioned aviation being a service industry, maybe Ankur, if you could step in here and talk about, we all say all but one are bleeding, you know. Has Indigo really set new standards in Indian aviation? Will this year also once again celebrate what Indigo has done? Or are we overstating the case?
See, as far as Indigo, any other carrier for that particular reason is concerned, I think it's a matter of being in the particular market, being at the particular place at a particular time. So at this particular time, if with Kingfisher moving out of the market, with Jet Airways and other carriers also reducing capacities in the domestic skies. It's definitely good management as well.
Yes,
there is no doubt about that particular fact, because the people who are running the business know the industry, and that is very, very important. With the other carriers coming in, I guess Jet Airways was the first one who actually knew the industry, and again, I mean, that group also knows the industry well. So I think that is a very important thing, because the aviation business, when you try to run it, it is a very hands-on business. You cannot have it run in a way that by automation or whatever. It is a business which has to be run on a minute-by-minute basis. You cannot say that this particular business will you get to a particular situation and then you can forget about it and it goes on like some of the other businesses which might exist. So I think that is a very important thing to point out, because obviously for them, for Indigo, they've actually kept it. They kept the momentum, and the market dynamics have also worked to the fact that, despite the fact, that we have had a reduction in capacities at the same time, with Kingfisher going out, when other carriers also reducing capacities at domestic skies.
Good management and good, fantastic service. When I fly Indigo, I'm assured that I will reach on time, perhaps 10 minutes before time, and I say that as a customer who's tried every other airline in the last few weeks, and I don't really get that commitment. And you think that's been one of the big game changers, the fact that they could sense that in the Indian aviation space?
That is the point, Shweta. Indigo today is a leader in providing the quality service. But let me tell you,
despite being a low-cost carrier.
Despite being a low-cost carrier. But let me tell you that the other carriers are also coming up. Now, if you see the on-time performance of the carriers, Indigo was the best, it was the leader. But soon, with the passage of time, we found that the other carriers are also coming up.
They're catching up. They're catching up. They don't have a choice.
So that is why I say competition is necessary, so that the quality goes up.
I would just add to that. Last year, what has happened was that there was tremendous amount of overcapacity in the skies, and that led to the fact of growth and tremendous growth. I mean, we had seen unprecedented growth in the last year.
So it was about who could capture that.
No, it's not a question. It's just that people had to fly, and an airline seat is the most perishable commodity on this planet. As soon as a plane takes off, you cannot sell that seat again to anybody else. Right. So that is why you had these issues in terms of services and all the other things, because everybody wanted to go and grab market share. This year, despite the fact of one large carrier not being flying there, despite the fact the numbers have gone down, and the numbers have not gone down significantly because of the increase of prices. The demand is also this is the realistic demand. I mean, it's not that people are just going Delhi, Bombay just for the heck of it, because obviously that is what was happening last year. I mean, the ticket price was so cheap that it made sense that for somebody to go on Sunday morning and come back in the evening.
Okay, Kapil, I just have exactly 60 seconds.
I'll tell you two things. First, just a myth that we don't have overcapacity currently, and just because the fares are high doesn't set that correct.
Okay.
As we're coming to Indigo, is that I treat it as a classic example of an airline getting its business model right for the Indian market.
Right.
It has been profitable since last 3-4 years, and I rate the success of Indigo in a hyper-competitive market better than Jet. That when Jet was in 90s, Jet was an outstanding airline in 90s. Right. But in 2000, right from 2004-5, when they started in a very tough, hyper-competitive market to make money consistently for 3-4 years, they've got the business model right. We must celebrate its success, because these are the cases which will inspire other airlines to come in.
And will we see more airlines getting profitable in 2013?
Well, we would see, I am hoping that the private airlines combined would do closer to $200 million minus Kingfisher, and Air India would substantially improve its loss projections for this year. I would expect next year, subject to oil being profitable for most of the airlines.
Most of the airlines profitable. Okay, one last
Except
question. Will Kingfisher fly in 2013?
I expect that to happen.
Mr.
I don't think so. They had that ample opportunity, ample time. If they would have been able to make it, they would have made it by now.
Ankur?
I guess it's as good as everybody else's.
All right, Mr. Bhargav, would you like to talk about other airlines getting profitable in 2013, and will Kingfisher fly in 2013?
Well, if it flies, it will be good for the market, but no astrology being applied here. It's entirely up to Vijay Mallya, the way he takes it forward. But I would come back to your earlier question also on Indigo. Yes, it calls for a case study as to how is it that Indigo has been successful financially. Because we cannot be overlooking the fact that when you compare Indigo with 3 major carriers, Air India, Jet Airways, Kingfisher, don't forget, all of them had a decision on merger, acquisition, and they paid heavily for it. Indigo has not made that mistake. It has grown in a calibrated manner, swept the market, increased its market share as the market share of or as the withdrawal of capacity was being done by Kingfisher. There are very many factors that have gone in favor of Indigo.
Sure.
As I said earlier, the management also deserves credit.
Really,
I'm not taking it away.
I'm really out of time, Kapil. I think I'll have to just wrap it here. Okay, very quickly.
Indigo's business plan is long term. It doesn't change if there is one cyclical dip.
Sure.
They have a well-funded business case which is long term, and they stick to that business plan.
All right, but we really hope that 2013 will not see so many turbulent times for the Indian aviation sector, and there will be clearly more airlines that will be more profitable next year. With that, it's a wrap here on We Mean Business. Many thanks all of you for joining us and sharing your views, and you, the viewer, can also send us your feedback on the show. The details there on your screen. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.